Us a better understanding. We're now joined by Cal State East Bay professor Lonnie Avi Brooks. Professor, thank you for joining us. Of course, the rocket attack definitely took the world by surprise over the weekend, but the conflict there has been ongoing for quite some time. Could you help give us a little bit of background? Was there an incident that triggered this violence over the weekend?
Yes, thank you for having me here. Strategically, Hamas made a mistake. I mean, there have been warming relationships between the Saudis and the Arab Emirate states in the past years, where the Arab countries have wanted to create more peaceful relationships with Israel, create a more lasting peace. Hamas is basically an Islamo-fascist regime. Unfortunately, they don't represent the hearts and intentions and minds of most Palestinians necessarily. And at the same time, the treatment by Israeli settlers of Palestinian inhabitants has heightened in recent violence against Palestinians, especially in the West Bank. So you have a whole tinderbox here of strategic interests where Hamas is working in some ways on the behalf of the Iranian regime against the Arab states too. Again, it's sort of like a proxy war. And so that's, really terrible and utterly destructive, because Palestinians and Israelis all hope for a more peaceful future. This is a terrible intelligence failure on the Israeli leadership, and they will have to pay for this as well. But Hamas has at its charter the killing and wiping out of the Israeli state, and they see Israeli citizens as soldiers of the Israeli state. So, their actions in terms of abduction of hostages and killing of innocent civilians really shows some of their true colors, unfortunately. Just in March, there was thousands of protests against Hamas internally in Gaza, as well as in Israel by Israelis against their own Israeli government and President Netanyahu. So, I think it just shows that Israelis and Palestinians want a better future. There's no reason why Gaza cannot be a flower of the Middle East. I mean, it has, some of the most beautiful peoples and countryside that you can imagine. So there's so much more at stake here, and it's just a sad day to see this violence happen. But again, it's important to understand the context. The media wants to force us into rigid polarities, and there's no reason why you can't be both pro-Israel and pro-Palestinian peoples, and just pray for the best for both, that they can imagine our way outside of this conflict. But Hamas has made it difficult. Israel actually ceded territory to Hamas in 2004, ceded the Gaza Strip to the Palestinian peoples, that is. Hamas won an election, and then they became a brutal dictatorship. They threw the PLO that used to rule the Gaza Strip, they threw them out in a civil war. And, they have become sort of like ISIS in many ways. So again, their peoples are not under complete freedom either.
That's what Prime Minister Netanyahu is saying today, that the world should respond to this as they did when ISIS was such a threat. I guess the question I have is, okay, Israel was attacked. They're now responding, declaring war. What is the end game? What does Israel hope to achieve before it will pull back and the violence will end?
Well, it wants to remove Hamas from power. That is the end game. And
is that possible?
Well, it is possible, but probably at a terrible cost for the Palestinian peoples, and for Israelis that maybe have been abducted. So this is horrible, in terms of what the outcome is. I mean, the outcome in the near term is not good. In the far term, we can hope for a more lasting peace. But Hamas is a terrible security threat, not only to Israel, but to its own peoples too. They have squandered their opportunities for making peace, and they've objectively stated that that their goal is to wipe out Israel. I'm Black, Jewish, and Native Americans. I understand the oppressions of my peoples, and I really, really am empathetic to the Palestinian people's causes. I want them to have the most that they can have, as well as the Israelis.
Professor, here at home, Americans trying to make sense of all of this, those living in the U.S. who might not be American, is there something we should be keeping in mind as we see and hear what is coming out of there?
Yeah, I would say, keep in mind that I was in Israel last summer. People are on the ground, irrespective of their governments. They want peace. There's plenty of, I have Israeli friends that have Palestinian friends and who have African refugee friends and who really do not represent the right-wing tilt of the Israeli government, and Palestinians do not believe in Hamas. So understand that human beings are involved here. It's not just government rhetoric. It's more than that. We have to imagine better. There's no reason why the Palestinians cannot have the regime they deserve, the democracy they deserve. So keep that in mind. And I'd say try not to, be totally like anti-Palestinian or anti-Israeli, but have empathy for what these peoples are going through. And, Palestine has a right to exist. Israel has a right to exist. And we can create something better than this and what's happening right now.
Well said, and we have to leave it there, but more empathy certainly is a good idea. Lonnie Avi Brooks, professor with Cal State East Bay, we thank you for your time this evening and wishing all the best to the people in the Middle East.